Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. And you can hold me like you held her. And I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to do a book review. I haven't done just a standalone book review for a while. And it's a book I read before my trip. Maybe I finished it on the plane. Anyway, and wanted to talk to you about it. The book I'm going to talk about today won the Pulitzer Prize this year, or I should say won a Pulitzer Prize this year. Not the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, which is the most commonly discussed Pulitzer on BookTube, but there are, in case you don't know, there is a Pulitzer Prize for history, there is a Pulitzer Prize, another separate Pulitzer Prize for biography, a third Pulitzer Prize for memoir or autobiography. I think that's only started in the last couple of years, separate out biography and memoir/autobiography, and a fourth Pulitzer Prize for what they call General Nonfiction. This book won the 2024 Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction. I'm talking about A Day in the Life of Abed Salama by Nathan Thrall. Now, I was going to go and hear Nathan Thrall talk. He was introducing this book in Jerusalem, again, I'm talking about 3 or 4 weeks back before my trip, and I actually left work in order to drive Jerusalem. I work in Tel Aviv. To Jerusalem should be about an hour, and I left time to go hear him speak and get my book signed, and as I left work, Waze told me it was going to take me like an hour and 45 minutes, not an hour, and I would have missed the start of the thing, and that was even without worrying about where I was going to park. And in the end, I just turned the car around and didn't go. So really sad to have missed that opportunity. At that point, I had not finished the book. I had read about half of it. I was in the middle of reading it. I may have mentioned before, I'm book monogamous, so that was the book I was reading, but I was still keen to go and hear what he had to say. But let me tell you a little bit about what this book is and my thoughts on it. A Day in the Life of Abed Salama is a piece of non-fiction about a man called Abed Salama, who I guess is a couple of years younger than me, so born maybe in the very early 70s. I think it talks about early on. Talks about him being a 14-year-old in the mid 80s. So I'm guessing that's about right. And the day in question here is a terrible, tragic day in 2012, where a bus carrying his 5-year-old son Majid to a school outing was hit by a semi-trailer, and there was I think 6 children in all were killed, including plus one of the teachers. Just a horrific nightmare, every parent's nightmare, and this tries to look at it through the lens of where this was happening, who this was happening to, what were the root causes of what happened, and without being heavy-handed and pointing fingers and laying blame, to sort of just parse out the way different people may be treated in different ways. So I came to this with some trepidation as an Israeli, part of the occupying side, not the occupied, and I was nervous about how this was going to portray and the culpability of Israel and Israelis towards this tragedy, and I don't think that's what the book is trying to do. I think it's kind of half-hearted. On the one hand, it kind of wants to point fingers. I'm not sure this is the case that does that successfully, and I'm not sure Abed Salama is a sympathetic. He's a father who lost a child, but all the work that's done leading up to that makes him, to this reader at least, a sort of deeply unsympathetic character, and I want to explain a little bit about that. So as I say, I'm roughly the same age as Abed Salama, and I came to Israel for 2 years after high school. Like, I took a year off and then I stayed a second year. So I was here 87 to 89, then I went back to London, studied, got married, and moved back here in 1996. So certainly my time in Israel overlaps to a large degree with Abed Salama's adult life in the occupied territories. I was here in 87 when the first Intifada started. I came back to live in Israel 2 months after, or a month and a half after Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish terrorist in Tel Aviv, and then the Second Intifada, and a lot of that is my lived experience as an Israeli. I can't speak to anything that we're seeing here. I want to talk a little bit about Nathan Thrall and then a little bit about Abed Salama. Nathan Thrall, the author, I did some checking into, here's what I know about him and here's what I see not being said about him. So I know he's Jewish. I know he lives in Jerusalem with his Jewish wife and his children. I know he's lived here for many years. Nowhere in any of the press about this book or anywhere on Nathan Thrall's website or anywhere does it say whether or not he is an Israeli. I know he's born in California and has lived in Jerusalem for many years. So American birth. I think his mother might have been a Russian refusenik who ended up in America. Maybe I'm misremembering that. But nowhere does it say that he himself is an Israeli. I would say, and I can't say with 100% certainty, but I would say with 90% probability, the fact that he's a Jewish man living in Jerusalem with a Jewish wife and Jewish kids, I would say almost certainly he is an Israeli, which means he votes in the same idiot elections that I vote for. Maybe, and there's a reasonable chance, and I don't want to again make any assumptions, but I think there's a strong chance that Nathan Thrall and I vote for the same political party. So, I place myself on the left, and some people would say on the far left of the Israeli political spectrum, whatever of that still exists. And there's a good chance that Nathan Thrall and I are of similar politics. Now, in the blurb, this is what we know about him. He spent a decade at the International Crisis Group, where he was director of the Arab-Israeli Project. So this is a man who was an activist and worked for Israeli-Palestinian relations and promoted equality. I'm sorry about the beeping outside. I'm sorry about the ceiling fan as well. I turned the air conditioning off, but it's almost impossible to exist without some kind of air in this place. What was I saying? Yeah, so Nathan Thrall, an activist and someone who's dedicated his professional career to highlighting injustice for the Palestinians, and I just don't know if this is a great thing, a great story on which to hang that strain of activism. Abed Salama, as I say, deeply unsympathetic man. We hear about him as a young teenager and his childhood relationship with a local girl who they were very much, they seemed to be very much in love as they were teenagers, until the point when he did ask her to marry him. And then there's some shenanigans going on where her family he asked the father to marry the daughter. And there's some shenanigans where he doesn't get an answer right away, and then someone else says, well, they can't marry you because of the family that you're from, and in a huff of indignation he publicly announces that he's withdrawing the engagement request, and goes off, and a week and a half later is engaged to someone else who he clearly doesn't love. And this first relationship, he meets this woman over a period of time, including in the aftermath of the accident. He crosses paths with his teenage love, and a man whose pride destroyed his first and true love. Okay, so that's one aspect. But then he's married to this another woman with whom he has several children, but becomes so bored of his life with her that he tells her he would like to take a second wife. Now, again, we're not talking about the 1850s. We're not talking about the 1930s. We're talking about the 1990s, 2000s. This man is roughly the same age as I am. He has a wife. He has beautiful children with her, and just decided that he wants to take a second wife. This is not normal. This is not, bigamy is illegal in Israel, and I think in Palestine, although within certain communities, there's ways of doing this. He clearly targets a younger woman and decides, and just tells his wife that he's taking a second wife, and he tries something else out here. He just seems to not be a very decent human being. And this young teenager who he proposes to be his second wife says, I will only marry you if you don't divorce your first wife. which he agrees to, and then the minute he brings it home, the first wife leaves him with the kids, leaves him and says she will not accept the situation and asks for a divorce. So he just, as I say, I don't find him, I'm not sure I would want to sit down and have a cheery lunch with Abed Salama. Nevertheless, he's the father of a tragedy, or the father of a son who dies. That is not right in any circumstances. The story of how Majid dies, again, while the overriding theme of the whole book is occupation bad, Palestinians victims, which is a lens I'm perfectly willing to consider and look through and take very seriously, especially considering my privilege. It just doesn't really, this accident happens. The truck that causes the accident with the school bus is not in great condition. The driver should not have been driving it. The whole circumstances have little to do with Israel, unless everything is Israel's fault. And again, that may be an acceptable way of viewing things, and that may be, for many people, the right way of viewing things. But I think it's a stretch. And the way this plays out and the way each of the stories unfolds, the idea that somewhere above all this, we just have to understand, okay, yeah, he's not a nice man. Yeah, that other guy really should have checked his brakes. Yeah, he wasn't supposed to be driving that thing anyway. Yeah, the ambulance. But, regardless of all that stuff, Israel's fault. I don't know if that's really Thrall's goal. I felt somewhere in there that might have been, and I don't think it really works. And I was ready for that to be the thesis of this book. And I don't think, if it is, I don't think it's successfully argued, but I'm not sure if it's even meant wholeheartedly. This book suffers, like many works of non-fiction, from basically being an extended magazine article. I imagine this story was written and sent and proposed to people, and they said, yeah, what we'd really like is a book. And the proof of the pudding, this just won a Pulitzer Prize, but it's around 200 pages, and there's a lot of padding. We get a lot of backstory. We get a lot of, anyone who comes on the scene, anyone who was driving past who gets involved in the accident and trying to save things. We get 40 years of their previous life, how they got to this point, how they became a doctor, why they considered doing this. So there's a lot of that. I would say on a where it's most successful is that on an individual human level, every individual human being encountered here is presented with some dignity, even if they're not always likable and empathetic or sympathetic characters. Everyone is treated with it seems like a terrible thing to have to praise, but everyone is presented with human dignity and as human beings, whether we're talking about Palestinians or Israelis. And there are several instances where individual Israelis, including soldiers, react with enormous empathy and do things which you think, oh, this is going to go in a bad way, and actually each individual responds in a way which is only human, humane, kind, in the face of something which is just horrible. A car accident, children's lives being lost, the confusion when ambulance and rescue services have taken children and bodies away before the parents can even understand exactly what's happened and whether their child is one of the missing, one of the dead, one of the injured. So all that confusion and tragedy is horrible, and yet each person involved, I think, is shown probably in a positive light. Although and that's individuals and humans. There is undoubtedly, even if the idea that everything is Israel's fault isn't successfully argued, I think the idea that there is systematic imbalance of power, there is an occupier and an occupied. There are people for whom, in order to get from where the accident happens to the hospital, where the children have been buried by emergency services, which maybe if the argument is would the ambulances have got there faster if this had happened to Israeli kids as opposed to Palestinian kids. But having arrived and taken the kids to hospital for treatment, for a parent or for somebody to go from the occupied territories through a checkpoint and make it to hospital in Israel, that struggle is real. The oppression is real. The occupation is real, and that is clearly shown here. I think this book has a lot to offer. If you want to know sort of small detail, what occupation means on a daily basis, on a small way. I think I don't think it's a successful argument that the occupation is every tragedy and every terrible thing that ever happens root cause in occupation, but I think there is a sense of the perniciousness and maybe the banality of evil, in that there's no one person who's responsible for oppressing any other one person, and yet clearly one side is privileged over the other. I don't know if this was wholly successful for me. I think it's an interesting book. I'm glad that it won a prize because I think more people will come to it. It's always wrong to argue the book wasn't the book I thought it was going to be, but my concerns that it was going to be very heavily showing, giving lots of examples about what an awful oppressive place it is. I don't think it does that successfully. I think this is a human tragedy that could happen in many places. That it happened here and it was to some degree compounded by the occupation, I think is indisputable, but I don't think that's the source of the tragedy. This is a child who dies in a car accident, and a father spends a day trying to find out what happened. That's A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, Anatomy of a Jerusalem Tragedy by Nathan Thrall. I recommend it. I don't think it was entirely successful for me, but I am probably an unusual audience for it in that I'm here and part of whatever shit is going on. But I recommend you seek it out and form your own thoughts on it. Day in the Life of Abed Salama, Nathan Thrall. Thank you. God bless. Bye.